All right, good to see you, my friends. Gloria, we got Toby, Zadie, Erwin. Oh, I can see your face. And Judd, good to see you as well. Oliver, Henry, and Melissa. I'm just going to do a general, or wherever that was already muted. So that. Okay, too soon. All right, I'm going to mute, but you'll be able to unmute yourself as always, God willing, to ask any questions. Okay, so we're on Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph. I'm going to lower my shinder so I can see you guys. Okay, so this is where we left off. Really, this discussion harkens back to the Mishnah on Yud Amud Aleph on 10a, in which we're dealing with the issues of what happens when you are in a legitimate sukkah. The sukkah has proper dimensions, albeit there's a bed or some other structure in the sukkah that's interposing between you and the schach that you want to be sitting under. So we said, in general, when you have kinofos, a four-post bed, so that's going to be puzzle. That's an issue because it's mafsik. You're in an ohel, you're in a separate structure interposing between you and the schach. However, we said that a kila is different. Well, we're going to talk about what a kila, what kind of kila we're talking about tonight. But naklite hamita is different. Naklite hamita is basically the triangle. And the lights just turned off over here because I'm in the civic room. Just give me a moment to flip it right on so I don't have to keep going and waving the whole session. All right, and we're back. Okay. So we're up to the second line on the top of Yud Amud Aleph, the top of 11a, which we have a Lishna Achrina. We have a different version. So previously we had this term called a kila. Now the kila we talked about 2 weeks ago when we last met was a structure more akin to a four-post bed. But now we're going to talk about what's called a kilas chasanim. And its kilas chasanim is basically resembles more like your triangular bed, which we said is not as kavua, it's not as established, it's not as problematic given the right circumstances, because it's a slanted wall. So we're going to delve right into that right now. Lishna Achrina. Amila Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel Mutter Lishon Bekilas Chasana Besukkah Lefi She'ein La Gag Afal Pi Shegvoa Asara. So one is allowed to sleep inside this Kilas Chasanim. It's Kilas Chasanim, it's triangular slanted roof bed inside a sukkah. As long, even if it exceeds 10 tefachim, right? Even if it's like it's a real structure, it's above 10 tefachim. Why? As long as she'ein lagag, it doesn't have a roof. Now, what do you mean? Already doesn't have a roof. What I mean is, as long as the upper part that goes across is thin, that it's less than a tefach. So that means effectively there is no real roof there, and therefore it's not considered to be interposing between you and the schach. However, Nesve is what appear to be contradicted because it says Hayashim Bekila B'Sukkah Lo Yatzei Chavaso. It says that someone sleeps in a kila and a sukkah, they're not yotzei. Well, here's the simple answer. Hachamayaskinan B'Shiyesh Lagag. We just said, well, provided there is no gag. What in the case of that brisa? Why can you not sleep in a kilas chasanim and a sukkah? Because the case there the brisa is dealing with, we could reconcile by saying is that it does have a gag. It does have some sort of little mini roofing on top.
Rabbi, to what extent is it relevant, because they're using the term chasanim, that this is a bridal canopy? If it's just a regular tent, does that change anything, or is bridal relevant?
It's a good question. My understanding is that the bridal component's a little bit of a red herring. I think it's just describing a piece of furniture that people are familiar with. But I don't, what interesting, what you could ask is, is whether they would be exempt, whether he would be exempt from using the sukkah on his wedding night. We know that there's a patur from Kriya Shema. Now, Kriya Shema requires extra kavana. So maybe that's why Kriya Shema is different. But just because you bring this up, we're going to get to this, I think, more in the second chapter. One of the main heterim for a married man not to go in a sukkah is that it says Teshu Kain Tuduru. You're supposed to dwell in the sukkah like you would in your house. Well, if your wife doesn't want to be a camper and sleep in the sukkah, well, you're going to leave her alone inside. So maybe there's some elements to this over here. Okay, there's something to think about. Definitely, the laws of marriage do have bearing on Hilchos Sukkah, but I'm not sure over here. I wouldn't be surprised if someone darshans a connection, but I think Bapashtas, it's a little bit of a red herring. If you were living in Talmudic times, you'd be like, oh yeah, of course, a Kilas Chasanim. I saw that in Beth Bath & Beyond, or whatever you call Zechron Levracha, whatever you call those places. Raymore and Flanagan. Okay. So now, next question. Is that also out of business now? Oh no. Okay. We don't want to make any Ayin Haras. All right. Tashima Naklitin Shnai. Okay, we quoted this last time. This appeared, I believe, also in Yunam Beis. Tashima Naklitin Shnai Kinovos Arba. So we know that Naklitin are 2 poles. Kinofos is a 4-post bed. Okay, Shkayach, we know that already. Piris al Gabi Kinofos. So if you put a cover over the 4 posts, Psulam, then it's disqualified because it's interposing. Al Gabi Naklitin, however, on top of Naklitin, as we said, the 2-post bed, Kshera. Bilvad, Shalo yu Naklitin Gavo min Hamita Asar Tfachim, as long as it doesn't exceed 10 Tfachim. It said nothing to do about whether it has a gag or not, whether it has a roof. So hagvoin min hamita asara psula. That implies that it will always be puzzle if it exceeds 10 tefachim. Afal pisha ein lagag, even if it doesn't have a gag. So why is it over there that the gag doesn't seem to make a difference? So now we got to start. Again, it's already difficult to understand the furniture they had back then, but apparently there are fine distinctions. Shiny naklitin tikfi. Naklitin are considered to be kavua, more so than akilas chasanim, even though they look very similar to each other. So naklitin are considered kvi. But ikvi, if they're considered to be firm and established, they should invalidate your dwelling in the sukkah just like a 4-post bed. So now we gotta split hairs a little bit. Legabe kinofos lo kvi, legabe kila kvi. So when it comes vis-a-vis a 4-post bed, it's not considered to be firm and established. Vis-a-vis kilas chasanim, it is firm and established, and therefore naklite hamita naklitin, they are problematic when they exceed 10 tefachim, regardless of whether they have a gag or not. But when it comes to a kilas chasanim, it would depend on their height and whether there is a gag or not. Okay, a little technical over there, but glad we did that. Okay, moving forward. Darash Rabba Bar Rav Huna. Mutter lishon bekila afal pisha yesh la gag, the afal pisha gva asara. Oh, wow. This is a very liberal shita over here. He says you could sleep in a kila and a sukkah, even if it has a roof, meaning has the tefach roof, and even if it's 10 tefachim tall. Wait, who holds like that? Kiman, Rabbi Yehuda, like the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, that will come up on Chaf Alpha and Beis. To Amar, Lo asi ohel arai umavato ohel keva. That Rabbi Yehuda holds that a temporary, or not, like a weaker ohel cannot, because the sukkah is also temporary to a certain extent, but so a weaker ohel cannot come and be mevatel the fact that you're dwelling within a broader, stronger ohel, which is a sukkah. The Tanan, as we taught in the Mishnah there on Chaf and Beis, on Rabbi Yehuda, when we go to visit the elders, the Bachrim, we'd be sleeping under the bed there because there was no room. Everyone was packing into that sukkah. And yet he held it was okay. All right, so this this rogue Shita is Rabbi Yehuda, who says, I don't care how, I don't care if it's Toler, I don't care if it's a Gag, it's not an issue. Okay, great. So then why did you have to give us that whole exposition, Rabbi Bar Rav Huna? Just say you rule in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda. So here's why he had to spell it out, why he couldn't just say, I'm asking, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda. Iyamar halachik Rabbi Yehuda, because had he only said the halach is in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda, avamina, hani mili, mita delegaba asuya, avokil deletocha asuya imalo. I would think Rabbi Yehuda only taught that regarding a bed. A bed, you sleep on top of, that's it. It doesn't contain you. But a kila, which you sleep within, it surrounds you, I would think that's a bigger chiddush. That's a much tougher thing to say is not, like it's one thing to say you're under that bed, but when you're fully enveloped, that looks a lot more like you're in a separate structure. I would be more likely to passel that, or not passel, but rather say that you're not considered to be dwelling in the sukkah. Kamash Malan, that's why he had to spell it out, that he wanted to teach us the time of the Rabbi Yehuda, that applies to bed and applies to kila that you're enveloped in within as well. That according to the school of thought of Rabbi Yehuda, you're still considered to be dwelling in the sukkah. Nonetheless, that's a sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, so don't try this at home. Okay, that brings us to the Mishnah. Let me pause and just any questions, anything we can clarify at this point before we jump into the next Mishnah.
I got a question. Going back to the very beginning of the definition of a sukkah and the skach, we're supposed to have a certain amount of sunlight that can come in. There has to be shade, but it can't be entirely shaded. And here we have a bed, and whether it's got a V-shaped covering over it or a flat covering, we're still blocking out the light. So we're invalidating the sukkah.
Right. So your question, I think, also applies to a case we had earlier where we said that you can put decorations inside a sukkah, right? So
well, they're on the wall. They're not block. The way we do it is there's not blocking the skach, or they're hanging from the beams that are supporting the skach. They're not at the same level.
So what's interesting is we've had cases earlier on in which you can have when we're doing the sugya of dofen akuma and lavud, we talk about cases where in theory you could be sitting in a part of a sukkah that doesn't have enough schach, but because the entire sukkah is considered kosher, even the quote unquote non-kosher part is thereby validated. So the question here is, I have schach that's blocking out the sun. This is I just have an object in the sukkah that's blocking me from sitting under the schach directly. So the question is, the sukkah itself is inherently kosher. It's not an issue of a sukkah on top of a sukkah. We dealt with that. The sukkah is 100% kosher. The question is, am I considered to be sitting inside this kosher sukkah at this time? So that's So that's gufa. That's very much the question. I think in those cases where there's an actual roof, like where we have a 4-post bed, you're not considered to be sleeping within the sukkah because of the very point that you're making.
Yeah, but if it's pitched in a V shape, it's doing the same thing that the covering on a 4-post bed does. It's blocking out any view of the space between the pieces of the schach.
The fundamental question here isn't, am I getting shade from the schach at this point? The question is, am I considered to be, and then there's more lumdus, machlokes had to understand. So basically, am I considered to be sitting in a separate structure? Now we know halachically a structure generally in halacha is defined by a minimum of 10 tefachim. So if it's less than 10 tefachim, in certain cases, we could say, despite the fact there's something blocking between me and the schach, it's no worse than if there are decorations interposing between me and the schach. So the question is, am I considered to be fundamentally in a separate room or separate structure altogether? That's a major, I think at the heart of the question here, but your point's well taken. Okay, just a few supplemental points before we go forward. Rav Elyashiv, in his Haaros, he points out this actually connects to what we did in the previous Gemara as well. But if you recall, just a few moments ago, Rabbi Yehuda was going to visit his Rabbanan, and we had a case on Yunam Beis in which a number of Chachamim, when they went to a sukkah that, according to them, was not kosher, they said, "Anan shluchei mitzvah anan u'patur min sukkah." Yeah, we might be in a non-kosher sukkah, but we're doing a mitzvah. Does anyone remember what the mitzvah was in the Gemara? Yunam Beis on 10b. The mitzvah was they were going to visit the Reish Galusa. I believe they call it the Exilarch. They're visiting one of the great leaders of the generation. And I saw someone on mute. What are you going to say?
I was going to say, wasn't it Bikur Cholim?
So if you look at Rashi, Rashi doesn't say, though I'm interested where you got the Bikur Cholim from.
I thought that was why they were visiting, but
maybe. But according to Rashi, at least, Rashi said, Lahakbo pnei Rosh Gola, Dechayiv Odom Lahakbo pnei Rabba V'Regel, because you're supposed to visit your Rebbe on the holidays, on the Yom Tovim. So because he was considered a Rebbe of the generation, a Gadol Hador has a status of being everyone's Rebbe. So they're visiting one of the Gedolim. So since they're osik in a mitzvah, they're a patur in a mitzvah. I guess I didn't get my voice back completely yet. Since they're osik in mitzvah, patur min mitzvah. When you're osik in one mitzvah, then you're exempt from other mitzvahs until you complete it. Now, the interesting thing is when it comes to Talmud Torah, if I'm the only one who could do a mitzvah, so then I'm supposed to close my Gemara and I'm supposed to go do the mitzvah. So here's the funny thing. Why would visiting, coming to learn from this rabbi be more important than actually sitting and fulfilling the mitzvah sukkah? They should say, look, let me fill the mitzvah sukkah and then I'll visit my rabbi another time.
But also, isn't there a question of d'oraita and d'rabbanan? In other words, would you be if the two mitzvot are equal, okay, you're patur. But if one is more significant, you have to do the more significant one.
Okay, interesting. So, are you saying the Hakbel Pnei Rabba would not be d'oraisa necessarily?
And Talmud Torah.
I don't know.
Talmud Torah is not d'oraisa?
No, Talmud Torah keneged kulam.
That's right. Rura makes a really good point. Talmud Torah is keneged kulam.
Is that Talmud Torah though? Visiting the.
Very good. So Henry saw that I pulled the wool over your eyes. I purposely conflated things for the question. Is this a mitzvah Talmud Torah? No. Alakan Iri Baholech Lilmod Eitzler Rabba, when you're going to visit your Rebbe, Dahainu L'Shamish Talmidei Chachamim, you're going to pay homage to Talmidei Chachamim. Ubashimush Valai to have a Gishar Mitzvah. There's a separate mitzvah to go and to visit the Talmidei Chachamim, to give kavod Torah. And by the way, when we learned Maseches Megillah way back when, all the way at the beginning of Maseches Megillah, if you remember, we had a sugya of a hierarchy that if it is make Megillah, I have to close my Gemara. What about Talmud Torah to Rabbim? Talmud Torah to Rabbim. Public Torah study is greater than just a single person studying Torah. So it may very well be that the mitzvah of Sukkah would be, for lack of a better term, supersede the mitzvah of Torah study alone. But here, this is the mitzvah of paying tribute to kavod Torah, to honoring the Torah, to honoring the Torah leader. So perhaps that would supersede the mitzvah of Sukkah. Okay, so that was Rav Elyashiv. Another thing I want to share. Actually, no, the next piece is on the Mishnah. So back to the Gemara. Here we go. Back to the Gemara. So, Hidla Allah esa geven besadlas besakisos besichech al gava psula. So we actually referred to this Mishnah a little bit earlier. The Mishnah says, if you take vines of grapes or gourds or ivy, and you put it on the sukkah and then you put schach over it, psula, it's going to be invalid. However, if there's more kosher schach, meaning schach cannot be attached to the ground. One of the conditions we're about to say is that it has to be disconnected. Oh, sheksatan, or if you disconnected all the ivy and gourd and vines from the ground, and now it's detached. So then, shera, then it would be a kosher sukkah. Why? Zeh haklal. This is an important rule. Anything that is susceptible to becoming tameh and does not grow from the ground, you cannot use for schach. Whereas anything that is not susceptible to becoming tameh, the yidula min haaretz, and it grows from the ground, misachin bo, then we can use that for schach. Without getting into the details right now, getting something growing from a ground is not so hard. But you know what's a complicated issue that comes up is the condition that it cannot be susceptible to being makabel tuma. Why? Because many of us use bamboo mats. And the thing is that when something becomes a kli, when it becomes a vessel, when it becomes like a usable object, actually, so then it could be makabel tuma. It's susceptible to becoming tameh. So we're going to actually talk about a case later on about mats. And there's going to be a question about mats becoming tameh and whether they can be used. And so it's not so pashut whether one can use a bamboo mat for making a sukkah. It requires a broader discussion, but I'm just going to throw that one out there and put it on your radar. Okay. Any just pure clarification questions on the Mishnah? All right, into the Gemara we go. This is going to be I think, a really fundamental sugya to remember, at least just the general Rashi Prakim, the general principles. We're going to be doing some comparing, contrasting with the laws of tzitzis right now. Very, very interesting ideas. Just before we get in, because the Gemara is not going to say it right away, there's a concept called tasa v'lo min ha'asui, which basically means that there's an order to how you have to make your sukkah. You can, if you find a way, you go like when guarding Leviosa, and you suspend your schach in mid-air, and then you build the walls around it. That would not be a kosher sukkah. You have to build the sukkah; it has to be kosher, and then you put the schach on top. So the issue that the Gemara is about to deal with is that at the time that you put the ivy or you put the vines on top of your sukkah, they were not kosher. And when you detach them, you got an issue because you never did a maisa of putting down kosher schach on your sukkah. It was puzzle when you put it down. So how do we address such a case? How do we rectify that? Into the Gemara. Yasir Rav Yosef Kamed Rav Huna v'Yasir Kamar Oshek Satzang Sheira. Right. So we say either you when we said that when you cut it, the Mishnah says to cut it. It's not just enough to detach it, but you have to also sever it as well. Sorry, not sever. Sorry, you have to move it around as well. Why? What does moving around accomplish? We'll get into the lumdus in just a moment, but the general idea is that it's as if you're replacing it back down, but you're doing it legitimately this time because now you're replacing it as kosher schach. Now, there's just a little bit of a quick scuffle over here. Amar le Rav Huna, Hashmuel Amar. Wait a minute, didn't Shmuel say this? Adrahina Rav Yosef Aape. Rav Yosef turned to him in anger. Amar le, Atumi Kamina Alcha Delo Amar Shmuel. Amar Rav Amar Shmuel. So do you think I meant to say that Shmuel didn't say it as well? No, both Rav and Shmuel said it. Amar le Rav Huna said, no. Hachi Kamina Alach. The Shmuel Amra v'lo Rav. No, I mean to tell you specifically that Shmuel holds like this. There's no way that Rav held that you have to go ahead and you have to move around and replace the schach down in order to rectify the sukkah once you sever the vines from the tree. Why?
Rabbi, isn't the issue taking possession so that it's yours? Like, isn't that a reason to move it around? Because if it's part of the ground, then you haven't really acquired it because you didn't take possession if it's still in the ground.
But you acquire the whole ground and everything's attached to it when you purchase it or inherit it.
I agree with my grandfather's point. Meaning, I'm not sure to what degree also formal ownership is important here, but let's say it was, you own your backyard, right? So it's not so much ownership; it's that the schach is puzzle when you put it down.
What if I'm building a sukkah on somebody else's property?
Yeah.
If I have permission to,
Yeah, that's a
put it
kosher
somewhere
sukkah.
else. Or I'm just a renter, so the property is not mine.
You're allowed to do that. Yeah.
Right. So then wouldn't I need to take possession of the elements of the sukkah? Isn't that part of the requirement?
I don't believe so. Well, you know what you're thinking of. You're thinking more of when it comes to arba mina, when it comes to the four species. On the first day, we say lachem, that you have to be an owner of them.
Yeah.
But
I think, Rabbi, it's the fact that the pasuk Chag HaSukkot Ta'aseh, right? Shivat Yamim. So
I think there is such a
Ta'aseh, right?
I recall I think there was some havamina. There was some havamina of having ownership, but I don't think that's definitely not normative. That's definitely not how we conclude. But we do conclude on the first day of Sukkot when it comes to the arba minim, you need to be the actual formal owner of them. So stay tuned for the third parak of Sukkah, in which we'll get in depth on that one. Okay, going forward. So why is it that Rav cannot be the one who says they require to go the extra step to replace the schach down? The Rav Akshuri Mechasher, now the Girsa should add in a little bit more, below Nanua. So Rav says it's kosher even without replacing it. Why? So hold on tight for this one. Kiha the Rav Amr Chasida Ramata Chelsa Lefurzuma the Inchi Base. So what he would do is, Rashi points out that Rav Amram Chasida had this very unique shita. He held that the words urisem oso, you should see the tzitzis, is only an exclusion for someone who's a suma, who's blind. But in general, he holds, avoksus alayla, this is Rashi, chayiv, v'havi mitzvah seish lo zman grom v'nashim chayavos. But he holds in general that tzitzis, you're obligating tzitzis even during the nighttime, which consequently means that even women are obligated in wearing tzitzis according to that shita. So he made tzitzis for his wife as well. He was very progressive. And Tulan v'lo pasak rashi chutin shalahan, he put on the strings, he put them in, he tied them up, but he didn't yet sever them. I don't have my picture book with me, but you can imagine when you're he put it in through two loops, and now they're still one long string. So he needs to actually sever the heads in order to make them into separate strings, not one long one that he kept looping through. So he asked, do I have to redo the tzitzis altogether, or is it sufficient for me just to snip and then it's kosher? So this is what Rav told me. The fast gun, the hank sherim, all you gotta do is take, you're not supposed to use scissors, actually, you're not supposed to use metal per se. If you have some other material, you can use those scissors. You're not supposed to use metal on the tzitzis. I believe a similar consideration for not using on Mizbeach as well, the Semphalim Barzel. They are shortening life, it's metal is used to shorten life. I think it's the same svara. Point being is, hank sherim, Alma, this is an important line, Sikasan Zohiasiyasan, that the act of severing the strings of the tzitzis is what turns it into a kosher paired tzitzis. Hachanami, Rav would hold here as well, Sitzasan Zohiasiyasan, that severing the vines from the ground also is sufficient to render the sukkah kosher, and there's no further action needed. You don't need to start pushing up and putting back down the schach. That's how we know that is Rav's shita, because he's being consistent in how he understands tzitzis as well. Does the analogy make sense? Right? The act of severing is what's mashur. Good. Now, that would then mean Shmuel, who's his bar plukta, who disagrees, says it's not sufficient. So what does Shmuel require? Savar Shmuel, Lo Amrim Sikasan Sohi Asiyasan. Now, is this really true that Shmuel holds that severing is not sufficient? Vatani Shmuel Mishum Rabbi Chia Hita Lishnei Kranos Bevasa Achas Va'acher Kach Pasak Rosh Chutu Shalahen Sherin. So we have a report that Shmuel actually taught that if you have the strings in two different corners in one shot, all you gotta do is karate chop it down, and then voila, you have kosher tzitzis. That sounds like it's in line with Rav Shita. So my lasha kosher akach posek, isn't he tying and then afterwards he's severing? The answer is no. The order here is important. The sequence is important. Lo shaposek ba'akach kosher. What's he doing? He first severed the heads while the strings were loose in the holes, and then he went ahead and he tied it. According to Rav, you could tie everything beforehand and then just got to cut the strings. According to Shmuel, no, at the time of tying, it needs to be kosher. You can't tie and then sever afterwards. Now, the question is, though, posek v'achka kosher ma'alamemer. What's the chiddush, though? Okay, so, I mean, everyone's fine with that. Of course, why would I think that if I sever and then tie, it wouldn't be okay? What's the chiddush over here? So mahu detema, turning to next amud, ba'inan knaf b'shas seal the leka kamash milan. So I would think, Rashi says, b'shasha shaposlo shatolabo. I would think at the time that I put the strings, I insert them into the holes and put them onto the garment. At that point, the strings already need to be severed and ready to go. Kamash milan, it's okay. You can tie it beforehand, and then you can sever the strings afterwards if you find it easier to do it that way. I don't know how to tie tzitzis, probably a skill I should pick up. So I'm not sure which way is easier, which way is harder. This does sound harder to me, but I don't know better. Okay. Should we go a little, you know what? Should we go a little further? What do you think? No? Okay, we go a little bit further. Or actually, you know what? I have some supplemental material, so you can let me know how you're feeling after it. Okay, two things. One, a cute little idea I found in the Sefer Nitzotzei Hashas. This is, I read this just to humor myself. Nitzotzei Hashas is kind of like these Hasidic Vartlach on the Gemara. So, you ever wonder, in the Mishnah we just learned, the Mishnah said that if something is mechubar lekarka, if something is connected to the ground, it's puzzled from serving as schach. Why? What's the fundamental reason behind it? It's not a halachic. This is more of like an agadic thing. So what's his name? Rabbi Yisrael Sham Yosef Mevuhush. Perry Yisrael. Okay. It's very strong. I totally butchered that. He says, because the schach that's mechubar lekarka is puzzle. Why? The karka who bechinas gashmias. Because the whole point of Sukkah is that we elevate ourselves, the anane hakavo, the clouds of glory, we come closer to Hashem. So we don't want to be connected to the ground, which means that we're connected to materialism and physicality, and that's his nice little vart on why mechubar lekarka is an issue. Okay, take it or leave it. More fundamental question I want to get to is this whole strategy of taking the schach and, kind of you imagine with like a broom and you pick it up and you pick up the next one and you replace everything down. Why do we, what is actually from a halachic level being accomplished? Now, according to Rashi says, let's see where Rashi, where's Rashi? Why am I not seeing it? So Rashi says, Rashi uses the term sosra. Rashi describes it as like soser. What's soser? Like on Shabbos, when the 39 malachos. Which malacha is soser? Demolition, destroying something. When you destroy something, that's stira. So Rashi says it's like you're destroying and recreating the sukkah. The issue is that, remember we learned all those rules about lavud, how if something's within 3 tefachim, it's still considered part of the sukkah. So if you're just like shaking around the schach a little bit, right? You're being minanea it. you're just moving a little bit up and down, you actually still have a kosher sukkah. So you didn't demolish anything. So you're not resetting it. You're not making a new sukkah. So what actually did you accomplish then? So the Birchas Avraham says that, you know what's happening? This is like a really creative suggestion. There are those who hold, we don't paskin this way, which is why it won't be such a good answer, but there are those who hold that the same way the schach needs to be kosher, it can't be makabel tuma, and it can't be mechuber lekarka. So too the maimed, whatever is holding up the schach, also has to have the same, also cannot be makabel tuma. It also has to be something that's not going to be susceptible to tuma as well. So you know what happens when you lift up the schach? Well, humans are susceptible to becoming tameh. So at that moment, when you pick up the schach, even though you're just like shaking it around a little bit, since it's now resting on your hands and you are susceptible to becoming tameh, so that's what invalidates the schach. It's not spatially being moved away, but by you holding it up, that's what invalidates it. And then when you put it back down, it's kosher again, but now it's done the right way. The issue with this is that we don't paskin it. That's not normative halacha. So that's not really a good explanation. What about everyone else who doesn't hold that way? How do they explain what the benefit of nanea, of shifting it around is? So basically, what the Birchas Avram gets to saying is that it's not about recreating, it's not about destroying the sukkah, but it's about doing a new hanacha, about placing it down once more. Because he says the whole idea is to do a new hanacha, and his explanation is ki ein haschach shaykh l'sukkah, because the schach is not it's not connected to the sukkah. Ki shem sukkah b'omen shemunach shem schach l'shem sichach, aval marzika b'yado yishar to ein sukkah kilo munach batal shem. So it's not about changing the status of the sukkah per se. You're trying to change the status of the schach itself. And what's interesting, what comes out from this is he writes, so here's the thing. If the act of nanea was removing the schach, it's like the schach isn't there, it's like I'm destroying the sukkah. What if I have a 7x7 sukkah? 7x7 tefachim, remember, is the minimum shear. So I would think I only need to move one little section, like one tefach worth of schach away, and then I don't have a kosher sukkah. I don't need to trouble myself with the minaneh of shaking the rest of the schach. But the truth is, it's not about demolishing the sukkah and recreating it. It's actually each and every bit of schach needs to be replaced. It's a new hanacha. So even for a sukkah that is 7x7 tefachim, you would need to do it for all 7x7 tefachim of schach. That's what he says. Lo sagi shagvia naf alf ofen shaditz and nifsa sukkah. Because the idea is we're not postulating the sukkah, we're not disqualifying the sukkah and then revalidating it, but rather we're doing a new hanach altogether. I think I'll stop here before I keep talking. Chill. We'll take a break here. Okay, good learning together and wishing you all a wonderful Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.